there were two big stories that broke about the NSA today. And one was a function of a direct leak from Edward Snowden. The second was, part of the Snowden effect when the Chief Justice of the FISA Court was asked about these revelations. And the primary revelation was, and this is, I guess, documents that I would imagine, were part of the treasure trove of leaks from Edward Snowden that Bart Gellman had. I imagine that Greenwald also has them, but they're probably going through these. There's thousands of documents. They're still continuing to sift through them. This release.
Can't they hire somebody to do that for them?
Well, I imagine that they have teams to do it, but I also imagine that it's a quite sensitive issue.
No, I know.
But this one is an internal audit that was filed that was dated, I guess, May 2012, that looked back on infractions by the NSA of the statutory limitations as interpreted by the FISA court. Remember,
right.
We have the law, the FISA as amended, and we also have the Patriot Act that were interpreted in a broader fashion by the FISA court than was contemplated by Congress. So we have 2,776 incidents where the NSA collected, stored, or accessed or distributed legally protected communications in an unauthorized way. And each incident does not represent an infraction on one individual. They could be up to thousands. One incident was about more than 3,000 Americans whose privacy was in some way infringed upon illegally. We should also say this is just an audit of what comes out of Fort Meade in the Washington, D.C. area. We don't know about other collection areas around the country, and this is just for 1 year. This is pretty stunning, and what's really stunning about it to me, Cliff, is the president just came out a week ago and said, there's been no reports of abuses, I'll say.
Is he not reading audits? I hope he's not turned into like the George W. Bush kind of presidency where it's like, give me that one-page memo on Al-Qaeda is going to attack. I'll read the last 3 lines kind of thing. Obviously disturbing stuff, and this is the kind of stuff we've talked about, which is, because I'm reading this, and obviously they've got this Washington Post article, and some of it's not as nefarious. Some of them, there's like computer error in here, there's operator error, there's things, but I guess what it comes down to is it's kind of like anything else. Once you give people the power to do some of these things, inevitably power becomes abused. It's kind of like stop and frisk, which we've talked about, which is obviously was just decided by a court is against your Fourth Amendment right, and I've got a problem with no matter what. But even for the people who started it off with sort of the better intentions, 88% of the people ended up being stopped were African American or Hispanic. That's the way these things end up going. It may originally, quote unquote, be about the terrorists, but it never ends up being eventually about the terrorists. And that's the problem here is that some of these, I'm sure, I don't know, they don't have all the cases here listed here and whatever, and I'm sure some of these were more nefarious. They've got some of the ones here like system error, computer error, blah blah blah. But I mean, when you're playing around with information that maybe you shouldn't have, they're going to be system and computer errors, right? I mean, right. We see it all the time in the corporate world. Oops, we just released your social security number and personal information on our site to 500 million people. Screwed that one up, sorry. It's an argument for fewer people having access to sensitive information because mistakes are always made and people do stupid things.
Yeah, well, so let's break this down because you're absolutely the institutional argument that, look, you cannot collect this much data. You cannot do this much mass surveillance without there being incidents like this. I mean, we just in our beta testing alone, because I can't go through a day without talking about the app, we accidentally sent people, to test on iOS versus an Android. There's a certain inevitability that's going to happen. That's problematic, A. B, what's problematic is that this audit, Dianne Feinstein apparently saw it for the first time when she was going to buy the Washington Post. So Edward Snowden provided it to Dianne Feinstein, one of the greatest defenders of the NSA program. The FISA court also was not kept abreast of at least some of these unauthorized collections and data searches. What we have subsequently found out from that second piece in the Washington Post is that the FISA court doesn't even have an ability, once they're aware of this, to really monitor this. So it's really up to the NSA and what they decide to tell the FISA court. And then on top of that, this is just, to me, these type of problems are still incidental to the underlying problem that the whole program itself has been extended in a way where there is no adversarial check and balances on this. So the irony is, and Patrick Leahy has announced that he's going to hold more hearings on surveillance as a result of this of this leak. But the irony is that I don't even think this is the worst of it. Not so much that there could be even worse, unauthorized and mistaken collections, some of which may have been on purpose, according to this report. But I think that this is just sort of almost a byproduct of a bigger problem. Again, it's the fruit from a poison tree, or I know there's some metaphor in there.
There's some cool metaphor there. I'll go with the one I used to know when I lived in that wonderful city that you guys are sitting in, which was, if you see one roach, there's 100 you don't see.
Right.
And the history, I hate to get all historical and stuff, but history, bears all this out, that this is, we know we don't ever find out about the worst abuses. If we knew what Nixon was doing with Watergate, you think that was the worst stuff he was doing? How much of that stuff you think we never found out?
Right.
Not to mention plenty of other presidents and plenty of other times. And so this stuff kind of keeps dripping out. But again, that's my problem overall. I think it's sort of just a generic principle. It's kind of the one this country was founded upon, which is when too much power is put in too few hands with too little transparency, bad stuff happens. And to me, again, terrorism's a real risk. 9/11 happened. I was there and came pretty close to being, a part of that day, sadly. A lot of other things have happened. What happened in Boston? There are necessities here, especially in the modern age, that the founders couldn't have foreseen. Things like suitcase nuclear bombs, right? And these things are so. We need a working FISA court. We also, though, need to know that it's working in a manner that is consistent with our principles and what we believe. And you brought up an adversarial system, and that's obviously a huge part, and that's one of the reforms, thankfully, finally, President Obama brought up. But I think I talked with you about this. We've had conversations on Ring of Fire and other places. To me, I still have a problem with how the judges are even appointed. Yeah. I think it's too much power for one person to have, for John Roberts to have, unless I'm misunderstanding how it's done. And if I am, you can tell me I'm dumb, and you'd be the third person who told me that today, so that's okay.
Welcome to family life.
I'm sorry?
Welcome to family life.
Yeah, exactly. But how these judges are appointed, I think, needs to be a process that more people are involved in than just the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. I think, in addition to an adversarial situation when they're going over these proceedings in the court, what does that mean in the end? Are you going to have one lawyer who's understaffed and not nearly as prepared as the guy he's going up against? It's kind of like a public defender doing this. You need a real sort of robust presence that's adversarial, a department, if you will, not necessarily a huge department, but something. I mean, some of this stuff is common sense. We just need to think of ways that we can have more checks and balances, which is what our whole government and our whole system is based upon.
Yeah. And and just to that point, the chief justice of the chief judge, I should say, of the FISA court. This is the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, which again, not to beat this dead horse, was set up basically as a court that issued warrants. It was more or less a rubber stamp, but it at one point, sometime in around 2008, it started to rule and form opinions on the law that had set it up in some respects, and that was not an adversarial procedure. The Chief Justice said the FISA court does not have the capacity to investigate issues of noncompliance. In other words, it doesn't have the ability to check and to make sure that that the NSA is staying within the parameters, even the widened parameters that they have set up. And he says, in that respect, this is from the Washington Post, the FISA court is in the same position as any other court when it comes to enforcing government compliance with its orders. But that's not even the case, because an ordinary court could, based upon a finding that there have been violations of the law, issue an injunction that would change their behavior, and it could appoint a monitor to say that there must be a compliance. In other words, okay, you guys have, we've seen it in New York, because the NYPD back in the 70s went too far. There was a monitor on the intelligence units, and this court does not have the ability to do that.
Isabel Gillies to tell you when I got off to watch Serpico.
Yeah, well, I hope that wasn't going to be I hope that wasn't going to be.
If you're listening, Isabel, Serpico.
Serpico.
That's all I'm saying.
I've already seen that many times, but I'd still be sold on that. And then in this revelation, and I think we're obviously going to see more revelations like this that emanate out of that the stuff that Edward Snowden leaked. At one point, I mean, is there a threshold? Okay, now I've heard the argument that because Snowden had told the Chinese that the text messages of Chinese mobile phone users had been intercepted by the NSA, that somehow this is, this puts his revelations into another realm. I'm still not really quite sure on how this has to do, frankly, with national security in the way that most of us understand it. I mean, it might in terms of, industrial espionage, but I'm not quite sure. But put that aside, how much information do we need to see from these leaks from Edward Snowden that end up as a catalyst for legislation, for investigation, for public outcry, for more media scrutiny, for changes in policy, until we all recognize this guy's a whistleblower? And there was a great piece by Trevor Trim from the name of the organization, I think Freedom of the Press, I can't remember what the organization is,
right,
where he outlines just how difficult it would be for Edward Snowden to get a fair trial, because there is no whistleblower exception for espionage under the Espionage Act. There is no mitigation of espionage charges based upon what harm you did or did not do, or what your intent was, or what the implications of your leaks were in terms of furthering American policy in terms of providing sunlight on these things. And I just wonder at what point we cross some type of threshold where we all recognize that Snowden's leak have done a huge service to this country, as proven by the fact that we see legislators working on it, we see media, we see public outcry based upon these leaks, and only because of these leaks.
Right. I mean, I think what it comes down to is, There's people obviously invested in having the system the way it is. There's people ideologically who want the system to be the way it is. And then there's just the people that fight it out in the nitty-gritty of, well, he said this online 3 years before about how whistleblowers should be shot or something, which I don't even know if that's accurate, but I've seen that. Or, he's a Ron Paul light or whatever. And I guess my answer to all of that is, again, I'm looking at the big picture here. You know what I mean? And I don't really care about any of that stuff. I don't need to like Edward Snowden. I'm not even saying I don't like him. I don't have feelings for him either way. I don't know the guy. I know what he's done. And what he's done in the end is let us in on some important revelations and sort of made us rethink what we're doing. And again, just everything we're talking about right now, the conversations about the FISA court and what kind of reforms we need, this is the way our democracy moves forward and hopefully doesn't move backward, is when information comes out, whether it's via leaks this way or other ways, that we have these conversations and make sure that the larger sort of broader programs that we've developed are consistent with our beliefs. And obviously, there's a lot of things going on here that are a serious problem that need to be reformed. So to me, I don't get down. I mean, if you're on Twitter at all, you see it all the time. There's people fighting back and forth about he said this and didn't say that and blah, blah, blah. And I don't really care about any of that stuff. I want our system to work for us. I want us to continue to value civil liberties while also realizing there are dangers out there that need to be, robustly fought. And that's possible. All of that's possible. We've had balance before, and we've had times like the 1970s where we had the church committee hearings where we realized that we'd gotten out of balance. And you need to have, and I think post Watergate and after some of the information came out, some of the coups we had supported, there were a number of reforms and changes that we made, not assassinating foreign leaders and things like that were supposed to reform us, but. Things drift after a while.
Yes.
And obviously that sped up even more after 9/11 for obvious reasons. And so these are the sorts of things we should be revisiting, every decade or probably less anyhow. And so we should be thankful that something happened that spurred us to pay attention to these things.